Showdown. This is Jordan Bradford here with Jeff Beck, and you're listening to Just Ballin' with JB, brought to you by D. Oliver Design. For all your commercial graphic design needs, visit dolliverdesign.com. Join us each week as we break down the best stories in sports and play some games along the way. Without further ado, let's get episode 11 kicked off here, Jeff. Let's talk a little NBA. We got a lot on the lineup tonight, so we'll get right to it. NBA talk. First topic: Milwaukee Bucks. Looks like they've turned their season around. So, what's been the recipe for this success recently here?
I mean, we mentioned early on that we're definitely a little Bucks favorite here, living close to the border and having tickets for some time. I think it's intriguing for a lot of people because I think people, after seeing how the East played out last year, for the Bucks specifically, with Giannis running into some injuries, kind of felt like they never really got a chance to take off with Dame. But then the Celtics run away with it. Sixers make a big move in the offseason. It felt like to start the year would kind of be like, let's show that we are back in this mix. Some injuries happened, some things occurred, but like we're right here. To see them start off as slow as they were was, pretty shocking to me to see that. Get all the stats from that kind of first portion where they were really down. But just looking at these last few games, so they're 5-1 in their last 6 games. Threw Gary Trent in there because I'll do a couple games even and watch, and I just didn't feel like he was getting involved regularly. And even if some of the points were there, I think the efficiency wasn't there as much. So I did kind of include his stats. I think they're worthwhile, but even more so than him, Brook Lopez. I think those two guys have been really key contributors, and I shared this with you off the air, but I just feel like they're playing like a team. Giannis and Dame were putting up big numbers, but the rest of the team wasn't really getting involved, and they weren't getting involved early to get into rhythm. So the last 6 games, like I said, they're 5-1. Gary Trent's averaging 13 points a game now. That's shooting a heck of a lot more efficient. 3 rebounds, 1 assist. That's not really why he's out there. He's playing some really good defense. He's usually guarding the best player in the other team or one of the best players and putting up 13 a game now. So that's a big factor. And then, like I said, Brook Lopez has really taken off these last 6 games as well. He's averaging 18 a game, 7 rebounds, 2 assists. I've never been a huge rebounder, I think, because he's more about kind of defending that shot. And so someone's usually cleaning up the boards behind him. But 18 points a game is huge. Those are numbers there. That doesn't include what Bobby Portis is doing, Pat Connaughton, some of these other guys, DeLon Wright. I mean, they're all doing a bit better as well, getting more involved. But those two guys, I feel, between their efficiency and just purely the numbers that they're doing, when you have Giannis averaging 32, 6 assists, and 12 rebounds, Dame averaging 25 points, 7.5 assists, 5 rebounds, those numbers coupled with a couple other people stepping up, I think is what they needed. So to go 5-1 now here, the last thing I'll mention on them, and we talked about this a bit, but a few of their losses early on were close games as well. So had those have flipped a little bit, just gone their way, their record's going to look a heck of a lot better than it is. A 1-point and a 2-point loss to the Cavs, who were undefeated at the time, a 6-point loss to the Celtics, which we touched on briefly, is an incredible team. I think they just need a little bit of a tweak, a couple guys getting involved, and they can really get into a nice rhythm here.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and especially as it relates to, playing a little better team basketball. I'm just looking back at their games, their box scores, right? And, in the first 10 games of the season, they didn't have a single player on the team to register double-digit assists. And that doesn't mean everything. Obviously, if one guy, dominates the box score and assists, it doesn't necessarily mean you've got great ball movement. But for a team with, Giannis, who is a great passing big man, and Dame, who,
drawing a lot of attention
for his passing. But obviously, both of them draw a lot of attention, and Dame is a good passer as well. To not have anybody register double-digit assists in that first 10-game window does say something about maybe team chemistry. And I think, there's a lot to be said about kind of getting everybody back in the flow of things. Obviously, I think there was a lot of sour taste in the mouth of the players and even the coaches maybe from last season. Just the way things ended, going from, they finished 2 seasons ago, they finished with Budenholzer, fired him, brought in Adrian Griffin, fired him midway through the season with a pretty good record, actually. But obviously, vibes were off there. Brought in Doc. That's been pretty bad. I think we've talked a little bit about that, but his tenure at the Bucs has been pretty underwhelming. And so obviously there's a lot that needed to get worked through. The Bucs have now won, they just beat the Heat. So, we got 5 wins in a row. I think that game just ended a few minutes ago, actually. Ended up being pretty close after it was looking like a blowout in the first half, but no Giannis tonight. So that's a good sign, too, is no Giannis. Dame stepped up, played great, but the team is definitely showing a lot more chemistry. Everybody's getting involved a little bit more. And so I like what they're doing. Obviously, you're going to have to see that for a lot longer stretch than 5 games or even I think looking back, they've won 7 of their last 8. Again, solid turnaround after starting the season. I believe they started off 1-7. So, they had to get a turnaround, especially if they want to be a competitive team in the East. And they appear to kind of be trending in the right direction. So, I would say overall, things are looking a little better in Milwaukee. But, Giannis for sure been balling out and looks as good as he's ever looked, really. So that's a super good sign for Milwaukee. Whether they end up a great team or not, the better he looks, the better that is for the team.
No question. And I think for him, too, going to say the positive is, he plays so hard and so aggressive all year long. He's not one of those guys taking games off for the most part. Going to say, and he's been really durable, but I feel like the last couple of years that has been the big issue for him, and it's come unfortunately at the end of the season. So I don't know if that is wear or tear, because he's going so hard throughout the regular season. I love that, but the timing has been unfortunate. He's not someone who's really dealt with injuries all year long that have been nagging. So he's cautious about it, just aware of that situation. I hope it's, an Anthony Davis type of situation. He was never as bad as AD, but you watch him now, he gets little nicks and pains, and you can tell he's fighting through those. He's getting treatment, and he's coming back ready to go. So I hope that he can continue to do that. But based on the kind of the trajectory they're on, I just think, like you said, it's important that they keep it up, because I think seeding is going to be fairly big for them, especially after the last couple of years have finished. I don't think they're in a position to come in as the 6th seed or 7th seed, be playing what appears to be a better team and feeling all that confident about it. Some teams, if you're the Celtics this year, even assuming it doesn't look like, you guys just lost your vibe, maybe there's some injuries, some people are out, they end up in the 6th spot or 5th spot. They're probably feeling pretty good. I think the Bucs kind of need to make that statement, like we're going to be that 2, maybe 3 seed. I'd say 4th, the absolute lowest, but we got to be one of those top 4 seeds, so we get a good draw, get ourselves in that rhythm. So I do think keeping it up for the long haul will be important for them. I don't think they can really dilly dally this season.
Yeah, and last thing I'll touch on with the Bucs, at least, and I think this kind of relates to what you just said about getting like a better seed. Is, as the NBA has clearly got a lot more parity, I would say, than it's had, in decades prior. That's, evident by the fact that I believe the last 5 NBA champions have been different now. And so that's just not usual in the NBA. Typically, you get these little mini dynasties or even, full-fledged dynasties that kind of dominate the sport for periods of time. With more parity means that it's more difficult, right? So you want to be those higher seeded teams. You want to be a 1 or a 2 seed so that you're playing the bottom end of the conference that makes the playoffs when you get there, rather than be a 6 seed and you got to go through the 3 seed, you got to go through the 2 seed, you got to go through the 1 seed. And, that just takes a toll on a team. And the Bucs are an old team. I don't know if they're the oldest team in the NBA, but, looking at their roster, right, they got Brook Lopez, who's 36, Dame is 34, Chris Middleton, who hasn't played yet, but looks like he's starting to get closer, he's 33, and Giannis is 29, which is kind of hard to believe because it's always felt like he's kind of this young up-and-coming star, but he's been a young star for a while now, and he's 29, and Bobby Portis is even 29. So, your best players across the board are 29 and above. And so you have to take care of your bodies throughout the season. be healthy, but also be in a position so that you're not having to grind out 7-game series in round 1 and round 2. Because when you get to the conference finals and the NBA finals, it's going to require everybody to be at full strength.
No question. You mentioned the parity, and then the opposite of that, some of the dynasties that we've had in the past. How about we touched on it a little bit, I think, last week, but the Warriors, what a start they're having. I think we put on there, they turning back the clock. I would almost say, are they turning the clock forward? Is part of it as well. What's kind of your thoughts on them and how they're getting off to the start?
I mean, I'm super impressed with the way they're playing, and they're doing it in a bit of a different style than they have in years past. Even, I think like the turning back the clock is really just like, they're an old team too, but they've got some young talent that they've infused into that older core. Obviously, Klay Thompson's gone, and that was a big story in the offseason. But I think that was a good move for the Warriors, even though that was probably a very difficult decision to be made. At the end of the day, he wasn't going to be able to fit what they needed. They needed some more youth. They needed some more athleticism. They already have the best shooter of all time. Yes, it's great to have the Splash Brothers have two of the best shooters of all time on the same team and in the same backcourt, but you needed to kind of adapt and evolve a little bit to continue to stay competitive. And the parity on that team is even a lot more now. And you're seeing a lot of guys score, a lot of guys do a little bit more. I mean, they replaced Klay with Buddy Hield, and I've always been a big fan of Buddy. I don't know why his career has not like ever taken off. I think he's ended up on some bad teams. That's been kind of part of it. He was with the Kings for a while. I know he was with I believe he was with the Pelicans for a bit. Just some teams that are kind of perennial losers, which obviously just makes it tough for you to have a successful career unless you're like a superstar. But Buddy, I mean, I think he's a guy who clearly he's contributing to that team. I think he fits in perfectly because he's coming off the bench. He's scoring, he's shooting. He's just providing that little bit of extra offense that you got from Klay before, and now you're getting that from him. And then you're getting the defense and the athleticism from guys like Kuminga, who's stepping up, DeAnthony Melton. Like, I don't think people give him enough credit. That dude can really play good defense for a guard, and he's a solid player all around. I think the Warriors have done a lot of good things. Draymond, for the most part, seems to be kind of keeping his cool, even though he got in a little scuffle with Zach Edey. Was that, I don't know if that was last week or over the weekend or what it was, but it was pretty recent.
Potentially.
He like tripped him with his, I mean, it was another one of those like questionable plays where you're kind of like, I mean, it's hard to give you the benefit of the doubt anymore. But like Draymond seems to have kind of gotten his anger management in check a little bit better. I don't know if it's like kind of getting rid of some of those guys that he didn't mesh with on the team, like Jordan Poole. But he seems to be playing a little bit better, certainly kind of facilitating the way that he does. And Steph isn't necessarily like, playing lights out, but he's just playing really good basketball, which is what he always does. And super impressive what he's capable of doing at his age. I think Golden State is going to be one of those surprise teams that if they stay healthy, they're going to be a difficult team to contend with come playoff time.
I agree. I mean, a lot of the stuff you said, I kind of agree. I got some numbers that I thought stood out to me as well to kind of complement that. But I'll start with, I guess, just, you finish with Steph. I think that's, a huge piece to it is, you look at Steph and, we just talked about kind of durability with Giannis. I think Steph was always known to be a little injury prone. The ankles were issues. I went back and looked. He played 26 games in his third season that he only played 26 games. Every other season he's played at least 74 games. Other season he's been in the league. So he actually has been very durable. He hasn't been very injury prone. And a player like him where athleticism, quickness, I mean, he gets to the rim actually a lot better than people think. But it's not as much quickness as it is really shiftiness and people being very concerned about his shot that helps him get to the rim. So when you're not, the Ja Morants, the Derrick Rose, like You can continue. I mean, you've seen Chris Paul do it for a very long time, and he's not even half the shooter that Steph Curry is. So just his game allows him. I think he can keep doing this. I mean, he's averaging 23 points, 6.5 assists, 6 rebounds. So, I mean, he's playing very well, especially for his age. And I don't really see there, a whole lot of potential that slowing down. I think Draymond can kind of just see his game overall just slowing from, what he was at one point. Even LeBron, you've seen a huge decrease in what it is. He's adjusting how he's playing now and playing a bit differently. But the athleticism is just not there the way that it used to be. So I think Steph's really kind of carrying that team where it is. You touched on a few points, and I think it's another thing that just impresses me with Golden State, always seeming to do things differently than a lot of other teams, right? This last few decades, if you look, last couple decades, have been a lot about the big threes, these teams kind of pairing up via trade or, demanding a trade, getting into free agency and joining whoever they want. They were the first team really to build it through the draft almost completely. I mean, I get the Kevin Durant couple of years obviously came over, but that wasn't even, really how they got started and got their first championship. And so they're finally just seeing some of that stuff come into fruition, right? Some of the guys they drafted, and I could be off on some of them that they drafted, but I think they drafted Kuminga. So he's been on the team. They've been waiting for him to do something. He's finally averaging almost 14 a game. Like you said, that youth, that athleticism has been big. I think they drafted Moses Moody too, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's in his
I believe they drafted Moody.
He's fine. His numbers aren't crazy, but he's contributing. He's just playing a really solid role for him. And then you think about some of the trades they did make. These aren't the big three type of trades, but you mentioned Buddy Hield. I mean, you replace Clay. Buddy's averaging 16 a game on 43% from three. I mean, that's as good as Clay was doing, when he left, not in his prime. But just, that replaces that perfectly. They added that, or might have just drafted, actually, Drace Jackson Davis, who's kind of filling in for that Looney role. He doesn't need the ball. He's not getting his back to the basket, but Looney's getting a bit older, and he's kind of filling and replacing that role, which is huge. And Wiggins, that was going to kind of be my last point of it. I think not only are you seeing it in the numbers and the play, I think the team was mentally almost kind of rejuvenated. Right, like Clay leaving, I think was really sad and hurt a lot of the guys. But at the same time, it was, you saw when they played him the other day, it was like, let's prove it now. Let's prove that he made a mistake leaving our team. Like, we love him, we're gonna be best friends outside of things, but like, let's prove to him he shouldn't have left because we still got enough here, and like, we're gonna make this happen. Andrew Wiggins, like, he went from playing excellent when they won the championship to just dropping off, and now he seems to kind of be re-energized back at it. Draymond as much as he can be. But I think a lot of these young guys that are coming up are, ready to roll, saying like, all right, it's 2-3 years for most of us in the league. We've learned a bit, and we all got this kind of extra new energy of like, there's some new guys we traded in. These young guys are coming into play. We do actually have like a fully blended team. We got the veterans that can lead us. Like, let's go out and prove it to everybody. But, even kind of the Clay, like Clay left, like, let's show them this was a contending team here. I think that statement probably stuck with them. Like, I'm going to go to the Mavs over the Lakers because I want to be with a contender. They're probably like, you were on a contender right here. Like, you could have made this work. And I feel like you're seeing kind of that energy throughout the team. Kind of cool.
Oh, yeah. I mean, outside of seeing the Warriors and the Lakers maybe meeting up in like the conference finals or something, I mean, that'd be a dream. But also seeing maybe the Warriors and the Mavs play in the playoffs at some point would be, pretty incredible. Get a chance to kind of turn the heat up on that Clay leaving the Warriors thing and just see what they're both made of. Again, these guys don't have a lot of years left, so you got to kind of soak these in because you got a whole new wave of guys coming up, and I mean, we don't know who's gonna totally take the reins yet. I mean, it's just been so much kind of parity across the board. I mean, a lot of people thought Jokic was gonna just kind of come in after they won and take over the NBA, and now it's kind of like I don't think anyone's taking Denver that seriously, and maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe that we should be taking them more seriously. But, clearly, these guys that have kind of run the NBA, your LeBron, your Steph, they've only got so many years left, and it's definitely getting down to the wire. And it's cool to see both of them leading their teams in different ways, but also, still playing like A-level basketball. They did it in the Olympics this summer, and now they're doing it to start the season. So just hope they both can, stay healthy and, be, in great shape come playoff time.
No question. I think and probably a topic for another time, which would be cool. But we talk about the parity, and I mean, we see the game growing right overseas, the Olympics. It's just much more competitive. Half our best players are coming from international countries at this point, and I think but everything kind of goes in waves. And I think a lot of the reason why some of the big three stuff now is because of the way the salary caps and the way they've structured things. They've kind of made it clear and known it's impossible really to get that third star or third max player at this point. And so, to your point, I think guys like Jokic and Giannis, I think they are still those top guys in the league. You're seeing not only some of the older players are still staying at the top level, younger players are developing quicker. It's creating like just a huge competition level. And based on some of those new restrictions, I think it's going to be hard for some of these teams to stay together. Celtics look like somehow they've been able to accomplish it and might be able to have a nice little few-year run here. But I see it maybe some point in the future. And again, this could be a fun topic later. But, talking more about how maybe it'll come back. You get the Jokic just kind of complaining like, hey, we won the championship. We're the best team in the league. And then we can't even hold on to guys and like keep a good team because of these restrictions. Maybe they loosen up in 5-10 years and then all of a sudden it comes back again. But at your point, I think – with old guys being good, young guys being good, these kind of middle-aged guys being really good, it's creating a lot of competition across the board. And I think the one very positive, other than maybe seeing a new champion every year, is actual meaningful playoff rounds. 1-8 is not just an absolute dud anymore. I mean, the West we've seen it's been like Denver and the Lakers, which has been Denver's swept them or 5-4-1, whatever. Like they haven't been close record wise. Watching every one of those games is like a buzzer beater coming down to the wire. It's not like the Bucks being the one seed against the Magic back, even 6-7 years ago, and it was like no one wants to watch that game. So in a good spot, and it'd be fun to talk about later.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's change gears here and go to a little college football. So we're down to the wire here. The season's almost over. There's only, technically there's 2 weeks left in the regular season, but one of those weeks is a week where only Army and Navy play each other. So for what it's worth, there's 1 week left in college football until we get to the conference championships. And we've got the Heisman race that's looks like it's coming down to 2 guys. So that's, Ashton Jeanty and Travis Hunter. If you had a vote, Jeff, who would you give your Heisman vote to?
I'd say I'm still maybe undecided, and I don't know if one more week will tell me enough. But I will say, kind of going into the day, is, again, Ashton Jeanty. I some stuff, and people just, maybe I was seeing it on Twitter or whatever, and just kind of talking about, we get what Travis Hunter is doing, playing both sides and playing, nearly every snap. That's awesome. But they were showing some stats or some numbers and basically just like, since when he's like 7th in this, 12th in this, 15th in this, whatever in this. When is just mediocrity across the board, some incredible feats. And I was like, yeah, I do get that to some extent. I'm like, that's fair. I think I would like it a little bit more if it was like you were the best at one of those and then more middle of the road at the other, but you're playing both every snap and you're doing everything versus if you are good at all of them, maybe even great, but not, the top tier. Started doing a little more, and I guess in comparison to Ashton Jeanty, 1,062 yards, 27 touchdowns. He's, I think, 550 yards I saw away from breaking the all-time record. Was it Barry Sanders, whoever it was?
Yeah, which he's going to have a pretty good shot at doing, assuming they, make the college football playoff, which, barring a disaster in the Mountain West Conference Championship, they will.
Yeah. So, he'll have a good chance at doing that. And you're like, that's just an incredible season. And, we'll get into this, in a little bit, talking about some of the scheduling. But then you do just think a little bit about, hey, he's not in a conference that's, a Power 4 conference. He's not facing the same competition. All those things kind of have to be factored in. And then I dug a little deeper into, Travis Hunter, and it was like, okay, he's got 1,036 yards receiving, which is 7th. in the entire, NCAA. He's got 11 touchdowns, which is tied for third in all of the NCAA. And then he still has 3 interceptions on defense, as cornerback. And I don't have all the other stuff, contended passes, deflection, that kind of stuff. But still 3 interceptions. That's not ranked all that highly. It's not even, I think, in the top 50 from a defensive perspective. But I think we all realize, he's a good defender, and some of that is a little bit eye test as well, and just how often people are throwing at you. Those numbers are actually a lot better than I thought. 7th in receiving yards, 3rd in touchdowns. I mean, that's pretty impressive to be doing it and playing every snap. And I think, to me, expectations is a big factor. And I think there were a lot of people that thought, the Buffalo hype was early last year and then it dropped. And then this year was no chance anything's going to be there. And for them to be there where they are, I thought that was a big loss last week to Kansas. I think that would have been a nice win for them, and they probably should have won that. But that was pretty impressive. And, I just saw one stat that stood out to me was in the last 40 years, only 10 players that aren't in the Power 4 conference have ever been invited to New York for the Heisman celebration. So to me, it's like, it's pretty rare for anybody. I think the last one was 2013, they said. So there's a reason for that. We're saying you're not facing the same competition, no matter what those stats might look like. You have to try and compare it to these other guys. So I started thinking about it, and yeah, I mean, I had money to bet on. I think I'd put on Travis Hunter because that seems to be the lock. If I had a vote, I'd probably be leaning that way at this point. Like I said, I don't know if a whole lot could change in one game. I think I did kind of change my mind early this morning.
Yeah, I mean, Vegas obviously has Travis as the favorite right now. And I mean, I think, the main reason is obviously that he's doing a great job on both sides of the ball. And he's playing like a ridiculous amount of snaps per game. I think Joel Klatt was talking about like the number of snaps he's playing, and it's somewhere in the ballpark of like 140 snaps a game, which is like obviously way above what everyone else is doing because he's playing both sides. But he, to his point, like he's playing like pretty much every snap. Like he's not taking a bunch of plays off on offense or defense. He's playing as many snaps as anyone else in those positions.
Any series offs, I don't think, right? Like he's just not coming in for a series and taking the series off. I mean, like most players, something will happen, will stop off for a minute, especially as a receiver.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But like he's, in the wide receiver room, he's playing the most amount of snaps. In the cornerback, defensive back room, like he's playing the most amount of snaps there. So like it's pretty impressive. Obviously, from like an NFL standpoint, I think Travis Hunter probably has a much higher ceiling as it relates to professional football, just, in large part because, his positions that he plays. And I don't know if he's going to be able to do, the two-way thing in the NFL. I think that's a lot to ask. It is a much more physical sport. It is going to be a grind to try to do that. And so I think he's going to have to pick a position, but if he plays wide receiver, which is what I assume he would play, because the money is there. Although that being said, right, if I were him, I might consider playing corner because you can stand out a little bit more. You're more likely to get those bigger contracts for the position group, but we'll see. Anyway, that's super impressive. One thing that I would be on the lookout for, and if I were voting, this is kind of what I would have to take into account a little bit, is that, Genty's going to get 2 more games before the Heisman votes happen, and Travis is only going to get 1 likely. Now, if I think if BYU loses and Arizona or Iowa State lose, or Arizona State loses, but 2 of those 3 teams have to lose, and Colorado has to win this week to get Colorado into the Big 12 championship, then Travis is going to get likely 2 more games. So that being said, if Genty can somehow, get that 500 and whatever yards he needs to break the record by the conference championship game, I think that's going to maybe tip it over to him. Also, he's probably going to eclipse, 30 touchdowns on the ground, which is crazy. I get that he doesn't play in like a power conference, and the Mountain West isn't that impressive of a conference. But that being said, like the Big 12 isn't exactly, a power conference either. In fact, the college football playoff rankings just came out, and I'm pretty confident. I want to make sure I get this correct, but if we look at the actual poll rankings, the highest rated Big 12 team is ranked number 14 in the country. So they're only in because the college football playoff says that their conference champion gets to go in. So currently, as it stands, they don't believe that Arizona State, who is the team that would be in at the moment, is one of the 12 best teams in the country. They're just one of the 12 best teams with the parameters in place of we have to take a conference champion from the Big 12. So I don't know that argument of the weaker conference should necessarily be as big of an argument as some people are making, simply because I don't think the Big 12 is a strong conference. If Travis Hunter was in the ACC even, I'd be like, okay, that's a little bit better. They've got 2 teams in the playoff right now. Clemson's just on the outside looking in. That's a different story. Obviously, if they were in the Big 10 or the SEC, then, those are the big boy conferences. But Big 12 is,
I was going to say,
they're the worst of those 4 conferences.
I think if Ashton Gentry was in the SEC, I think he's going to win it almost regardless of what happens over the next 2 days.
It would be unanimous.
It would be no question. And so I think, yes, I do agree with you about, the Big 12. I think you're just saying it probably is better. And then if you're just kind of going back on it's like, again, we'll get into the NFL MVP, but, you're kind of saying well, if no quarterbacks have any really good seasons, then let's slide over to the running back. I think you'd go from well, you're not in the SEC or Big 10, but now this guy's playing 2 positions and he's playing both. I think that's still getting the edge, obviously, in most people's mind, whether that's right or not. I think that's probably part of it. So it's maybe a little more competition and doing both of those.
And don't get me wrong, I think Travis Hunter probably is the best player in college football right now. That being said, I think for the Heisman Trophy, I think that if Genty, gets over 30 touchdowns, has 2 phenomenal games to finish, the regular season, including the conference championship, and they make the playoff, I think that's going to weigh on a lot of these Heisman voters. Even if he is, even if they are in a smaller conference, it is super impressive what he's doing. And especially when it came out of nowhere, right? He wasn't even on the board for odds to start the season. Whereas Travis Hunter, to his credit,
has been
on the board and has played up.
Ticket out there that has him as rookie, is any pre-season, before the season started. I get you could obviously have 2 games, but
yeah, when I looked up the Vegas odds earlier today, they said preseason odds didn't exist for Genty. So
that's another one.
Is that none of the sports books even would take a bet because they're we don't know how to we don't even have odds to
bet for it. Yeah, if someone asks about, we don't have that bet available, kind of thing.
Yeah, it'd be like me putting a bet on myself to win NFL MVP next year. It's Vegas is gonna be we're not taking that bet. Actually, they should, and they might.
Be the form for the charities for the donations. Just be thanks for donating to us. But yeah, I agree with you a lot on that. I think funny, and I do agree with it. But it is funny, sitting here today, we've watched what we've watched, we've seen what we've seen, and we can say, and I say we say, I get it's Vegas, but Travis Hunter is a favorite. He's minus 400. Ashton Gentry is plus 350. If he does what we all probably actually think is likely that he will do, he will set the record, the rushing record, then all of a sudden well, if he does that, I think I might have to sway my vote. And I'm saying I am in agreement with that because I think you get to some point where you're saying well, and I know this isn't a quarterback, running back, and that'll come up here in a little bit, but he's a running back, so he has to do something great. Well, if you set the record, what else is there for you to do, really? You know what I mean? I know you didn't set the record in every single statistical category, but you are saying this has never been done before. So if I do that, what else does someone at my position have to do in order to win the award? So it's just a weird thing because we're watching it right now. We're just this is incredible what we're seeing, regardless of the weaker conference, all that stuff. And then all of a sudden he gets the record, which again, probably a lot of us think he will. It's like, oh yeah, now he deserves it. Like, even though we kind of thought it. So I do agree with it, but I also just think it's like a funny thing, like process that we have to go through technically. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say about the Heisman race is this, and this is in defense of Ashton Genty in the weaker conference, right? Is yes, he's been in a weaker conference, but the one game that Boise State has played against the top tier opponent was against Oregon, and that came in week 2, and they lost by 3 points. And in that game, Ashton Genty ran for 192 yards and 3 touchdowns on 7.7 yards per carry. So,
there you go.
Again, we can't extrapolate that out and say he would do that against every top team. And if he was in the
Tweet that
SEC or
out.
the Big Ten, he'd have done it all. But I think he's proven like he can do it against anybody. And basically this whole season, every single team he's played has been attempting to figure out, just stop him, force Boise State to throw the ball instead, and he still is rushing for crazy yards. So I've been very impressed. To your point, I agree with like, what more can you do? If you set the record, there's like nothing else you can do. And basically, I think if he sets the rushing record this year and doesn't win the Heisman, I think the Heisman voters are basically saying if you're in one of those smaller conferences, you can't win the Heisman. Because we've seen quarterbacks have great years, like Colt Brennan back for Hawaii, RIP. But, he back in the day had like a season where I think he threw for like 50 touchdowns for Hawaii. And he made it to New York for the Heisman. It was a finalist, but he didn't win, right? Because the Heisman voters were like, it's Hawaii, Mountain West Conference. So, I do think like, this has got to be one of those situations where like if he sets the record, I think he's either got to win it or basically we all have to just agree like you can't win the Heisman from one of those conferences.
Well, I'm glad you brought up that game. That's an interesting point, and definitely I think would be a selling point if you're him trying to get it. But it kind of brings us to the next topic, which is, should scheduling make an even bigger impact these days on the playoff race than we've ever really seen before? And I think that, that example, really exactly that. I mean, they can sit there and run the table, as Boise State, but they're not playing these guys, and the SEC's beating each other up. And I think we all understand with the new playoff format, more losses are going to get in than ever before. Obviously, that just makes sense going from 4 teams to 12 teams. But, when you look at that, we were talking a little bit off air just about you see teams within the same conference. They're in the Big Ten, they're in the SEC, and the strength of schedule, the opponents they're playing, is just shockingly different. So, I mean, what's just kind of, I guess, your take on it and how big of an impact that should be, these days compared to years past?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to make the argument, I should say, that scheduling is a bigger deal when you're letting 12 teams in versus 4. But that being said, I think it's just as big of a deal at least because now that you're letting 12 teams in and you're not just going to pick the top 12 teams, because there is some parameters, right? They're going to give 5 spots to the Power 4 conference champions and the highest rated group of 5 champion. So that's going to be either, Boise State, maybe Army or Tulane. If Boise State loses and Tulane beats Army or Army beats Tulane, like maybe they'll be the one in. But you're gonna probably end up with the top 10 best teams and then 2 teams that are not quite in the top 10 but probably ranked, right? I mean, the college football playoff committee, I think I just said that Arizona State was ranked 14th. That's in the AP poll. So in the college football playoff ranking that just came out tonight, they actually have Arizona ranked 2 spots lower at 16. So you have the 16th best team in their mind is actually the number 12 team in the playoff right now.
It's just like the NCAA March Madness, for basketball. I mean, it's that same type of concept.
Yes, there are some,
but we've seen this kind of format.
You're not the best 64 teams because if that's the case, like there's going to be some like 500 teams in like the Big Ten or the ACC that are better than some team in the American Conference that or a worse, like the Missouri Valley Conference, right? Like, so that being said, like, I think scheduling makes a big deal. I'm looking at, a lot of people have been trashing Indiana, all, to start the week because of the loss to Ohio State. I don't know that I'm ready to say like Indiana should not be even like in the conversation for the playoff. But the reality is they haven't played anybody. And the one team that they played, they got beat pretty badly. Like, you can say that, Ohio State didn't play like the greatest game and that it was a lot of blunders on Indiana's part. But at the end of the day, they got beat like horribly. Like, it was not a close game. Indiana scored the first touchdown, and then basically from then on, it didn't even look like they were going to be able to keep it competitive the rest of the way. They played Western Illinois this year, which is not a team in their, in Division One, and I believe Western Illinois is 4-8 in their division. So like they're not even, it's just crazy. It'd be like an NFL team playing like Wyoming, right? It's like you're not even going to play the top team in the division below.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of crazy. So I think scheduling does make a big difference. I think it's a big deal. I think that the committee should be rewarding teams who are willing to go out on a limb and say, hey, we're going to schedule some tougher opponents. And if we end up with an extra loss, so be it. I'd rather have a 3-loss team in or a 2-loss team in over a 1-loss team that didn't play anybody. And I think it's, as an example, like, does anybody really think that Alabama wouldn't beat Indiana if they played each other? I mean, maybe people feel that way after Alabama's, poor showing against Oklahoma, but Oklahoma has a really solid defense, and that was a trap game for sure. Like, I just, feel that way because Alabama played Mercer the week before, which, again, scheduling, it's on them. What are you doing playing a Division II school? Or whatever it is, Division I, AA, I don't know what they call them anymore, but, FCS or FBS, but you're playing a tier below team the week before you play a conference opponent late in the season. Terrible idea. But yeah, I think scheduling should make a big deal. And I think the committee should be punishing teams that are scheduling these super weak teams in their non-conference and not rewarding a team for beating up on a bunch of average teams.
Yeah, I think it's, definitely a big deal. And I know it's always played a factor in stuff, whether it's 14 playoff or not, or, bowls even before that. I mean, it's always been a factor. I just think it's even a bigger factor now that because it's 12 teams, I think it opens it up to be able to do it even more. Because we're already all pretty much in agreement that teams are going to get in with more losses than in the past. I mean, it was like if you lost one game, you were questionable if you were going to even get in before. Now it's like you can be sitting there with 2 and 3 lost teams, and they're at least definitely in the conversation. We'll see, what happens if any of them get in the conversation. So we've already kind of opened up that floodgate. I think it's really difficult to look at a team like Alabama, and this, is not really any bias. I've liked them just simply because they've always been a good team. If they fall off tomorrow, I'd be like, I don't really care to watch them anymore. I just like watching good football. You look at them, it's like they played number 2 Georgia at the time, and I'll get to another point of this, but number 2 Georgia, number 11 Tennessee, number 21 Mizzou, number 15 LSU. 3-3. They beat number 2 Georgia, when they played them. They beat number 21 Missouri 34-0. They beat number 15 LSU 42-13. So you have some impressive wins. You have a lot of competition on that schedule. You lose to Oklahoma there. That's not a good loss. Obviously, that's not what you want to see. But, they're sitting at 8-3. And then you mentioned Indiana. They're playing in the Big Ten, so they're kind of getting that credit automatically for being in the Big Ten. Their best win is Michigan +5. They won by 5. Michigan's not, that's a
they didn't look good in that game.
Year.
That game was a game Michigan could have won.
And they won by 5 points. They stopped Nebraska. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a decent win. They beat Maryland, fairly handily. But they don't really have any impressive wins. They don't even have any impressive competition other than Ohio State. And when they got that opportunity to lose by 23, I mean, that's 4 scores. I guess if you're going for 2 on every touchdown, maybe you can make it 3. But to me, I just look at that. I don't know why. This is one, for some reason, I'm just very quick to like be willing to stomp on those teams that aren't willing to play higher competition. And some of it, I get in their conference, it is going to be what it is. I don't think you have a say in, obviously all your conference stuff. But I just look at that and think that's has to be playing a huge factor. I think it all comes back to that question, which I still don't know how we haven't answered it. I get it's not a perfect thing, like there is still opinion to it, but how we at least don't have the same results, right? It's similar to MVP. Is it the best player? Is it the most valuable player to a team? Is it the 12 best teams? Is that what we want? With at least a couple parameters like, okay, the power four and the next best guy. Like, okay, so it's not perfectly going to be the top 12, but it's going to be those 5 teams, and then it will be the next 7 teams after that. Or are we saying it's based on a particular resume and what you have and if you've earned the opportunity to go in? I mean, that really comes down to me, the question, because like you said, what's the line going to be? I saw someone put it up. It's like 3 SEC teams against other teams. I think it's a couple of Big Ten and maybe a Big 12. If these were hypothetical matchups in the playoff, these would be the odds that Vegas put out. And every SEC team is favored. So it's like, what are we really trying to get from there? The last point I'll mention with those rankings, which I just think is interesting, I don't know what you do with it or how it plays a part, but just like every sport, right, we're watching these games. We've talked a lot of NFL on here. It's like, oh, first 2 weeks, we think the Saints might be actually a really good team. These guys could be a playoff team. They're going to win, their division and they're going to get in. And then all of a sudden they fall on their faces and they're the worst team ever. So the other kind of interesting thing I think to it is you're saying like, well, Alabama played number 2 Georgia. At that time, they did. And so they went into the game thinking it was number 2 Georgia, but Georgia's not number 2 anymore. So I don't know if they able to factor that in. I think it would be interesting because there are some teams. I mean, Florida State, I think they were ranked to start the year, 6 straight or whatever it is. It's like that. If you beat them the first week or second, like that's not a good win that we thought was a good win, right? So I don't know how they factor that in all the time, but I think that's definitely worthwhile because there are some teams that get to certain rankings that clearly do not stay there. They should never have been there probably. And, we shouldn't get the same credit or we should get better credit depending on the team, in either case, if there's a way they can factor that in.
Yeah, I mean, they have like those strength of schedule, rankings. And I mean, it's one of those, like, I mean, if you look at Indiana's strength of schedule, they are
But when it
100.
is it looking at it saying, well, when you played Michigan, they were the number 10 team in the nation. Now they're not even
think
ranked.
those strength of schedules.
I
think when they do the strength of scheduling, it takes into effect like the actual like current today, like what are those teams like? So like if you play a team like as an example, Florida State in the preseason was ranked, I think, like number 11 in the country, and they've won 1 game all season. So
the team that plays them in week 1, they're going to get like a bump to their strength
as a ranked win.
against
on the strength of schedule now, it shows as they beat a team that was 1-7 or 1-8.
Okay, so that will adjust. Okay, so ranked win, but not.
Yeah,
okay,
so
that's better.
Yeah, so there is like a there's a way for it to basically kind of take into account there. But like Indiana, their strength of schedule is ranked 51, which doesn't sound like horrible considering it goes down to 134, but it still is 51. And I'd be curious how much of that 51 has to do with the fact that they just played the number 2 team in the country, and they only play 11. They only played 11 games. So when it's all said and done, they're going to have played 4 of the worst 5 teams in the Big Ten on their schedule. So Indiana, and again, I hate to rag on Indiana. I actually have really enjoyed watching them this season because they have looked really good in their games. I like their head coach. He's got some swag about him. I think that team is a good team. I just think that like it's not fair to put in a team like Indiana, but basically disqualify a team like Alabama because they had 1 bad loss. Because, I mean, you could make an argument that loss to Vanderbilt's not that bad of a loss, considering Vanderbilt, if Vanderbilt played Indiana, I think Vanderbilt would be the 2nd best team Indiana has played all year. And Vanderbilt is not that, like, they're a bottom tier, typically, SEC program. But they would be the 2nd best team that Indiana has played all season. Vanderbilt's
So
strength of schedule is number 9. And they're
9.
6-5.
So I
So they have had
wonder
a
what
top
it would
10
be like.
schedule, and they're
We
6-5.
mentioned 5. We mentioned like parameters, obviously, like the conferences that are going to get in. So like you can set some parameters, right? Like you could, in theory, say everybody who gets into the playoff has to be had no more than 2 losses. You could do that. I don't know if people would like that. If they wouldn't like that, I'm sure there would be some split to some degree. But something I think a lot of people probably would agree on is setting like a strength of schedule minimum. Like if you haven't even played a strength of, and I know this isn't like perfect, I'm just kind of talking out loud all of a sudden, but like if you haven't even played in the top 50 strength of schedule, why would we think you can play the top 12 teams? You know what I mean? Like even if you're undefeated, I mean, unless you have like, and again, you don't want to get too into the weeds on it, but if it's like strength of schedule this or at least 3 top 25, it could be one or the other, because you could play 3 really good teams, be in a shit conference, so that would give opportunities to some of these, not Power 4 conferences. Your conference schedule is going to be light. You have to schedule these outside of there. One, they're going to increase your strength of schedule. So even if you lose some of those to outside conference that are really tough, if you run through your weak conference, you still should have a good opportunity to get in there because your strength of schedule is so high, all these different things. So, I mean, to me, it would make sense. It would not only increase teams going out there and making a tougher non-conference schedule, which I think is good for everybody. Like Alabama plays Mercer. Who is watching that game? I don't care if you love Alabama and you love them winning. It's not a fun game to. Even if I'm betting on that game, I'll be like, great. I'll check it every 2 minutes, every 12 minutes, just to make sure they're like still whooping down on them. But nobody wants
even
that.
bets on those games. The spread was probably minus 30.
Yeah, I think I saw one that was minus 48 this weekend. So it's like, nobody wants. So I think it would increase the actual product for people. And again, it's like, what's one more stipulation? I get you don't want it to be like too crazy, but you already have, again, these conference winners are getting in. You could throw one in there. It's like, you just have to have a top 50 strength of schedule. I don't know if that would then put everybody outside of there thinking, what are we playing for? But maybe, again, like college basketball, we're kind of going to that format. Maybe you have like, with the second tournaments even called there. It's not the NCAA, the other one that they do. It's like then you have that tournament maybe for some second guys. Like I think that could be a fun way to do it to get the best quality teams into the tournament.
Well, yeah, and there's another team that is firmly in the playoffs that has had a even worse schedule this season, and that's Notre Dame. And Notre Dame is a team that I actually think is a pretty good football team, but their strength of schedule is 78. And if you look at their schedule, right, to your point, they've beat 4 ranked teams. They beat Texas A&M on the road in week 1, which that looks like their best win by far. But Texas A&M has been up and down. That was a pretty sloppy game. And they beat Louisville, that is no longer ranked. They beat Navy, that's no longer ranked. And they beat Army. So 2 of those ranked wins were against the service academies that were ranked because they were undefeated because they hadn't played anybody. So, and I would definitely feel even more comfortable if the committee punished Notre Dame for their weak schedule, because Notre Dame is not in a conference. If you're not going to be in a conference and you're going to schedule that weak of a schedule, like, how are you better than Boise State? Like honestly, like, how can you say that you're a better football team than Boise State when you are a 78th strength of schedule? Boise State is the 81st strength of schedule, and they played Oregon. The only reason that they're lower is because they're playing, teams like Wyoming every week. And granted, they barely beat Wyoming, which is another topic. But again, like, Notre Dame's got to be putting together a better schedule. I think at some point, like, the playoff committee has to start punishing them for these weak schedules. And I get it. Notre Dame's a super popular team. Everybody wants them in the playoffs because they've got a nationwide fan base. But, like, I want them to actually play good teams. Like, I want to watch Notre Dame football, but I don't want to watch them play Army. Like, I mean, I watched a little bit of that game because it was at Yankee Stadium and Army was undefeated. But about 10 minutes into that game, I'm like, this is a blowout. There's no chance this is going to be even close. I stopped watching. I'd love to
Like
watch
I
more
said,
football.
I
They
think
don't play about
that's kind of the perfect reason for it. Again, you don't want too much criteria around it that you have to qualify for that just excludes people immediately. But I do think in doing so, it not only is gonna create better television, better viewing experience for all of us, but it's gonna be telling to your fans. If Notre Dame all of a sudden has the 23rd hardest schedule and they're instead of 10-1, they're what 7-4, your own fan base is going to realize, like, well, hey, yeah, maybe we don't belong in there. The problem with people wanting to be in there when they don't belong is because their strength of schedule. I mean, that's really nearly the reason every time they haven't played the teams that the other teams have played that are getting in. And they're just like, well, we're undefeated or we have one loss, we should get in. But if that's the criteria they have to meet, maybe their fan, you'll be able to see it. I think it would cut down on the complaining and the arguing early on because you would just be able to see it. If we're playing tougher teams, who are the better teams and who are they winning to and who are they losing to at certain times? And, it just would make things a lot better. I don't want to, like I said, put too much criteria around it, but I think that would be a decent one. I think top 50 actually sounds pretty reasonable just based on the few you shared with me. I think if you're in the 50, you're in the ballpark. Going down lower would probably, very limit it too much. But I think top 50 would be reasonable.
Yeah, and obviously there's a lot you cannot control, right? You can't control if, you schedule a team that's preseason ranked number 10 and they end up winning one game all year. But maybe it's just your preseason strength of schedule has to be a certain ranking or better. And if at the end of the season it ends up worse, like that's not your fault. You did your best to schedule a good, tough schedule, and the opponents that you played just didn't, hold up their end of the bargain. That's a different story. But when you are just scheduling bad teams consistently, when you're playing like Miami of Ohio and they played Northern Illinois and lost. Like that loss should sting so hard on Notre Dame with the committee because of how weak their schedule is. Like they're going to have the worst loss of any team that gets into the playoffs, and it's not even going to be close because no other team has lost to a team that bad. So yeah, we'll wrap up part one here of our college football talk. But yeah, scheduling it's got to make an impact here at some point. So hopefully we'll have a little impact on the committee when they hear this. But we'll wrap
Things
this up.
are tightening up again.
Yep, we'll be back with part two. So stay tuned.